All right, and let's move on here to two other areas that we will look to as U.S. expansion. So in the next class, we'll focus on two that for a lot of recent Americans are a little bit closer to heart. We'll talk about Puerto Rico and Cuba, looking at how those fit into this American expansion period. But this time we're going to focus on more on the Alaska down and over into the Pacific Islands region. So Samoa was a relatively simple affair to a certain extent. Essentially, European influence had created colonial life there, just the overwhelming influence of European exploration and expansion in the area, and influence had grown and grown and grown over time. And so by 1878, the U.S. is moving into the region with it, expanding, exploring, and wants to have a foothold there. And so they're able to get an agreement with the Germans to, in 1878, establish a naval base there. And then in 1899, they're able to get an agreement with the Germans to establish, essentially divide control of Samoa, so having an east and west side. And the Samoan leaders really didn't have the power to do anything about that arrangement, and so just the way that it went, it was the erosion of local power is going to be sort of the story for a lot of these Pacific Islands. And an even better example of that than American Samoa is Hawaii. Hawaii was this sort of gem of the Pacific, and I always say the ancient Hawaiians were some of the smartest people who've ever lived, because they sailed the Pacific and from Polynesia and got to Hawaii and said, "Well, we made it," and they didn't have to go any further to find find perfection, because it is a lovely piece of the world. But European contact there had started in the late 1700s. The first officially recorded European contact was James Cook exploration in 1778. And he would end up dying as he revisited the area a year later. And it's kind of a odd, he had pretty fantastical life and a bit of an odd death. So if you want to look, there's going to be a video below this one of these. It's from Crash Course. It's called "The Amazing Life and Strange Death of James Cook," just because it's one of those stories that's just kind of crazy and odd that it happened in such a unusual spot in the world. But European contact continues, trade continues, and the Hawaiians are able to, acquire European tools and also weapons. And the one of the royal families of Hawaii is able to knock out other competitors using these European tools and weapons, and they're in the last 85 years, for about 85 years, a single monarchy is able to establish itself in Hawaii, and that is going to be the story of Hawaii up to the point where they lose control as an independent nation. And that's going to be into the 1800s when the U.S. starts to take part in the or establish control. So in the I believe it's 18 teens. I want to say, I'd make sure that's right, but the U.S. whaling fleet had a whaling fleet starts to winter there, and they're able to establish frequent contact and established trade. And then by the 1820s, the U.S. was sending out missionaries on foreign journeys. Missionary groups were going to lots of parts of the world, and one of those places is Hawaii. So in 1820, the first group of missionaries arrives, the first of 15 groups that are going to head in that direction. And so it's with those groups that Hawaiian culture starts to change. You start to get housing, the design of housing changes. So frame houses, horse-drawn carriages become part of life there. European style, European/American style schools, churches, taverns, shops. All these things really hadn't existed before. Maybe in a more local form, but not in the European style. And also written language comes with the missionaries. Before missionaries got there, the Hawaiian was both the history and the transmission of the language itself was completely oral. And so after the missionaries want to be able to communicate the Bible in a written form, and so they're committing Hawaiian to a written form and trying to translate teaching people their language, a written version of that, and then they can teach the Bible in that language. It's sort of a multi-step process, and this happens across the world with missionary efforts, and this is the process that it takes in Hawaii. And at the same time that the missionary work is happening, the power of the Hawaiian monarchy is going to be being eroded. They are going to be challenged by a smaller group of whites who are growing both in number and in power over time, and so that's going to be a problem for that monarchy. In 1840, they are pushed to become a constitutional monarchy. So that's a step that private property rights and some voting is happening, but in a limited form. But again, more of those property holders gaining more and more control, and less of that power in the hands of the monarchy. Then by 1875, the U.S. is able to push for a free trade agreement, sort of a reciprocity agreement. And then by 1887, the U.S. is able to establish a naval base at Pearl Harbor, which is going to play a major role in U.S. history in the next century. But that's where it gets its start. In that same year, I have 1893 on here. I believe it's 1893. I was just double checking my notes. I'm sorry. Just want to make sure. 1887, again, with the creation of the naval base and white planters, and these are mostly planters who are establishing, it's easy to grow things in Hawaii. And so these planters are becoming powerful as they become more and more wealthy, gain more land. And so they come into a disagreement with the King of Hawaii at the time over the promotion of Hawaiian culture and overspending. And white troops are going to be used to force a new constitution limiting the monarchical powers and adding new voting powers for wealthy residents. And so again, pulling more and more of that control, and now at the threat of violence, and that is a the par for the course as far as colonialism goes. But since this is a even more recent version of this, the story is that more it connects with us that much more because it's relatively recent history that this happened. And so as we get into the 1890s, the situation is pretty dire for the monarchy. And so the successor queen, the final monarch of Hawaii, and I don't have her name written down, but it was a bit difficult to pronounce, so I won't try to make a mess of it. You can hear it in the supplementary materials that we have here. But in the successor queen planned to essentially toss out the Constitution and to restore the monarchy and end the power of the planters and the merchants, basically just resetting the country back to a full monarchy and saying this has been a massive mess for us. We've lost all of our sovereignty and we are going to just take back our country. Thanks a lot. And the result was that the wealthy planters and merchants are assisted by some U.S. Marines who are stationed offshore and basically overthrow the monarchy completely in 1893. And so the President Cleveland at the time denounced the action and refused to annex the territory, but the McKinley administration would go on to annex Hawaii as a U.S. territory in 1900. Basically, they don't have a functional government, and it's too strategic of a position. It's in a perfect position there in the Pacific as sort of a halfway point between North America and Asia, and so that's the reason it's strategic in the 1940s, and that's the reason that so many airlines stop there today en route to Asia. It's a very strategic position in the world. And so by 1900, Hawaii is fully under U.S. control, but it came about by rather unfortunate means. There was no, hey, do you guys want to join the U.S. and get a rousing yay? And then there's a process that happens and it becomes a territory and then a state. It didn't really work out that way, and it was more of a erosion of control and a usurpation of power, and then almost a overthrow by force at the very end. And so that's left a lot of sore feelings for people of Native Hawaiian blood over even to this day. A lot of people who are have ancestors who are or Hawaiian by birth and ancestry often don't consider Hawaii part of the U.S. I still think of it as their land, and it's just under control by the U.S. So it's still a sticky situation for the people who are native to the islands. Becomes a state in 1959. So they're in the 50s with Alaska, and so to sort of round out your understanding of this, I've got there's 3 other videos here. One of them is a relatively short one where you can go see the last palace. It's Lalani Palace, the last official residence of the Hawaiian monarchy. It's been preserved and is there in Hawaii. You can go visit it. And so this is a great way that you can go visit it without actually going there, because it's quite a long ways to get to Hawaii. Then there's another video of an author on Hawaiian history, just talking about the late history of Hawaii and then the challenges of Native Hawaiians since then. So that's a good one to hear. And then just a general lecture also on the U.S. expansion and then the annexation of Hawaii, so how that process all fit together. Sometimes it's good to hear things a couple of times. So as far as the videos for today, the Alaskan Purchase one, I really recommend that one. It's a really great lecture on the topic, and I think you'll really benefit from it. And then getting to see the palace is neat, and also the author discussion. And if you have time, the lecture on Hawaii and U.S. expansion. So I think that'll do it for the week. I appreciate you being here. Hope you have a great week and that everybody is safe and healthy. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.